Hi everyone, it's Deanne here with Snuggles Quilts. I am today going to show you how to do stitching on wool applique. I have a wool applique series on my YouTube channel that I am sure most of you have watched. Unfortunately, in the stitching section, my stitching was on a small piece, and also I did go out of the camera shot a few times. And I was told that it didn't give a good view of the stitches, so I figured I would do just a stitching video to give you an idea of how to stitch when you are doing wool applique. There are two stitches that are used the most often, and they are the blanket stitch and the whip stitch. And then I'm going to show you how to do points and inside corners. That's why I chose to do a large star, and it will give you a good view of how I do those. Now, as I've said before, this is how I do it. It's not necessarily the way everybody else will do it. So when you are looking to learn how to do wool applique, go ahead and seek out several different sources, because then you can practice, which all of those people are teaching you, and then decide on what works best for you. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to tell you is I'm using a bright red thread so that it shows up. Most times I use a neutral thread, and a lot of people also use a thread that would match the green of the wool to make their stitches disappear. And some people use a black thread to give it a primitive look. But the reason why I'm using this bright red thread is just to give you a better view. So the first thing you do when you want to start a blanket stitch, you never want to start in the corner or on a point. If you're doing, you generally want to start on the most straight piece that you have on the item. So I'm going to start here on one of the legs of the star. You come up from underneath, right next to the applique piece. And if you could see my needle, it's a little hard to see, but you're coming up next to the applique, but not in it. So I'm pulling the thread through. Now you go down in the applique forward to make your stitch, and you can see where I have my needle. And then you pull it through, but you leave this little loop here on the top. And then you come up in the background fabric right at the edge of the applique again, inside that loop, and then you pull straight. And then it makes this little line, what I call a tooth. So then you go to the next stitch, pull down, and then come up at the edge of the applique, and then pull through again. And then you get your next stitch. So you can see the little lines on the applique showing where the stitches are. I'll do another one closer up. So I'm going to go down in the applique, pull it through, leave my little loop, come up just inside on the edge of the wool applique, and pull straight through. And see how it's creating this nice little line of stitches. Now, you don't want to pull these too tight, because then you can crumple up your fabric, your background fabric. It's always good just to pull them out like this, because then it leaves a nice straight line. And this is the way I teach. It's just a beginning way to learn this stitch. Now, once you get a little more advanced, you can go a little quicker by going like this, turning it this way, and doing everything in one step, going in, and see how my needle is going into the applique and right out at the edge of the applique. And then you, since your thread is that way, you just make sure when you pull your needle that as it comes out, you're making that loop. And then you just do it again. And you have it all in one step. So some people like to do it that way. It's quicker once you learn the actual mechanics of the stitching. So I like to teach it the two-step way first, and then once you get familiar with it, you can go on and do it the easier way where it's all in one step. So now we're close to the point. So we're gonna work on the point. What I do, I'm gonna do just one more stitch to get close enough to the point. And like I said before, other people might have other ways of dealing with points and inside corners. So just take what everybody else, other people do, and then decide what works best for you. So now we're at the point. So what I do is I put my needle in right at the point, like that, in the applique. And then what I'm going to do is pull it through, leave my loop, and then I'm going to get the needle to come up right at the tip of the applique, but in the fabric. And I'm going to make sure my needle goes through the loop, pull it through, and then I'm going to just, with my finger, just make sure the stitch stays lined up as much on the point as possible. So see how it's kind of hugging that? And then what I do is I go ahead and I put my needle back down right at the tip in the of the applique in the fabric above where I came through. And then I pull that through, and it's kind of like a locking stitch so that this stitch won't move once I go down to the other side. So what I do now is then I can come up in the fabric on the other side of this point and start my stitches again. So then I'm going to do my stitch where I'm coming down. Got my loop there. Get my needle up like that. And see, when I pull it, you don't see this point going off into the direction of where my stitching is, because I've locked this stitch right here. And so I can continue going down the side of the star and continuing with my stitching, and this point stays where it's supposed to stay. It's not bending one way or the other. So I'm going to stop with this stitching. And then I'm going to get another needle here that I already have threaded, because I am going to show you how one does a whip stitch. Now, often I don't do whip stitches on big pieces like this. I like to have the blanket stitch because I like to have the teeth of the stitching show up on my project. Obviously not as prominent in red. It would be in my tan or my black. A whip stitch I often use when I want to hide the stitches, or when the piece is very thin, like stems made from strips of wool. And doing the blanket stitch with the teeth would cause the wool to fray, or it just would distort the stem. So here's what a whip stitch looks like. You come up from the bottom of the applique, just like you did with the blanket stitch. And then you just kind of go down again, and you just nip a little corner of your wool applique, pull it through, and then you just go down again in the fabric, right next to where your stitch was that came up in the applique, and you then just nip your applique again. same going down in the fabric, just picking up your applique again. And as you can see, it's kind of just leaving little, it's a little hard to see, but it's kind of just leaving little dots. Now, if this was in the same color as your applique, you wouldn't see these stitches at all. And but because it has such a little bite out of the wool, that's why I like to use this stitch on thinner things like strips, and because of the, that make the stems. So now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to go revert back to my blanket stitch, because then I'm going to show you how I do my inside corner. So let's get one of the blanket stitches, and I'll get a tooth going here. So there you go. Now we're at the inside corner. So what I do here is I put my needle into the fabric, or into the wool, right at the where the apex of the point is. So you can see it right there. It's at top of the point in the wool. I pull it down and I leave my loop. And then I come up in the fabric right at the inside corner. And then I pull through. So then you basically have a stitch that is just pointing straight up in the corner. And then what I do is I come down onto the other side of that stitch, because right now your thread is on this side of the stitch. I come down on the other side of the stitch in the fabric, and it's basically very close to the stitch that came up. And as you can see, as I'm pulling that, it locks that stitch going straight up like that. So now I'm going to come and I'm going to start a new stitch here, as close as possible to the one that locked it without having it come undone. And let's start down to the other side. So we'll make our first stitch of our blanket stitch. And as I pull it, you can see that this stitch right here is not moving. So then I can keep going down and making more blanket stitches. And then you have this nice little looking stitch in your inside corner. So that's what I have on stitching for inside corners and points, and how to blanket stitch and how to whip stitch. Let me know if this is helpful to you in the comments, and if there's still a visibility problem with the stitching, let me know. I produce these videos all on my own. Have the door closed so Addie my cat cannot get in and disturb me. And so I try to do the best I can with the visibility and to give you good instruction. So have a nice day and happy stitching.